He carried her through a wall of white. The snow was so thick he couldn't see 2 steps ahead, but his boots knew this mountain the way his lungs knew air. The woman in his arms weighed almost nothing. She was wrapped in a thin blanket, shivering so hard he could feel her bones rattling against his chest. At his side, a gray dog ran low and close, pressing against his leg like a living compass. 6 hours earlier, Caleb Mercer had been a man who wanted nothing to do with the world. He lived alone on a mountain in Wyoming with a German shepherd named Echo and the ghost of a wife who had been dead for 4.5 years. He chopped wood. He fed the fire. He spoke to no one. That was the deal he had made with the universe, and the universe had mostly kept its end. Then his neighbor called. Then his dog started screaming at a locked door. Then he found her sitting in a broken wheelchair in a freezing cabin, claiming her fiancé had abandoned her, claiming she couldn't walk, claiming she had nothing. Every word she said was a lie. But Caleb didn't know that yet. What he knew was that the storm was coming, the cabin had no heat, and this woman would be dead by morning if he left her there. So he picked her up and walked into the blizzard. What happened over the next 5 days in that cabin, what his dog saw that he couldn't, and what this woman's lies would cost him, that is a story about trust. Not the kind you give easily, the kind that gets ripped out of you by a 65-pound animal who doesn't understand the word betrayal and doesn't need to. But first, let me tell you about the man, the Tom, and the mountain they called home, and about the woman whose name he would later learn was worth more than everything he owned combined. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The wind in the Wind River range of Wyoming doesn't blow the way wind blows in other places. It scours. It scrapes the high plains clean and whistles through the pines with a sound like a warning that never stops. Caleb Mercer felt the change in pressure before he saw it. He was standing on the porch of his cabin, hands braced on the railing, watching the sky darken from the west. It was October 2025. Early for a storm this size, but Wyoming doesn't follow calendars. Wyoming follows its own rules, and if you live here long enough, you learn to read the sky the way other people read clocks. Caleb was built for this kind of reading. He was tall, lean, put together with the durable strength of someone who had spent his life in hard places. Not gym-built, field-built. The kind of body that could carry a rucksack through sand for 12 hours and still function when the shooting started. His brown hair was longer than regulation, streaked with silver at the temples, even though he was only 42. His beard was thick and well-kept, and it covered the scar that ran along the left side of his jaw. He'd gotten that scar in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, 2012. An IED had gone off 30 meters from his position and sent a piece of the Humvee's door frame through the air like a blade. The scar was the kind of thing people noticed and then looked away from because asking about it meant asking about things that didn't belong in polite conversation. His eyes were gray, not the bright, sharp gray of a young man, a deeper gray, quieter, the color of river stone that has been tumbled smooth by years of water passing over it. They were the eyes of someone who had seen enough, who had made a conscious decision to stop looking at new things, and who had almost succeeded. He wore what he always wore. A brown leather jacket cracked at the elbows, left unzipped over a flannel shirt in shades of navy and gray. Faded denim, heavy work boots. Every piece of clothing on his body looked like it had been worn for a decade and would last another decade more. Caleb Mercer was a man who had intentionally erased himself from the world, and he dressed accordingly. At his feet sat Echo. Echo was a 4-year-old German shepherd, but he didn't look like any German shepherd you've seen on a calendar or a police recruitment poster. His coat wasn't the standard black and tan. It was a striking silver gray mixed with white, wolf-like, almost spectral. In the granite and aspen landscape of western Wyoming, he was nearly invisible. He could stand in a field of sage and snow, and you'd walk past him without knowing he was there until he moved. Echo had been a military working dog, trained at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, to detect explosives. He was good at it the way some dogs are good at fetching, and others are good at sleeping on couches. Echo was good at finding things that wanted to kill you. He'd served 2 deployments before the Army discharged him. The paperwork said behavioral irregularities following trauma, which was the military's polite way of saying the dog had PTSD. He flinched at sudden sounds. He wouldn't eat if a stranger was in the room. He didn't wag his tail. Caleb adopted him from a rescue organization in Montana in late 2022. 2 damaged creatures finding each other. Their bond was forged not in joy, but in a shared quiet grief. Caleb grieved his wife, Marin, taken by cancer. Echo, as far as Caleb could tell, grieved whatever life he'd had before the world broke something inside him. They were a matched pair, 2 sentinels on a mountain watching the horizon for threats that had already come and gone. Caleb sniffed the air. The smell was sharp, metallic. Not just snow, but this kind of snow that comes early and angry, the kind that buries roads and kills livestock and traps anyone foolish enough to be caught in it. Generators full, he murmured, more to himself than to the dog. Wood stacked. Echo's ears twitched. His eyes stayed on the horizon, watching the iron-gray clouds swallow the mountains to the west. He was like his master, perpetually on watch. The ringing of the satellite phone from inside the cabin split the silence like a hammer on glass. Caleb's shoulders tensed. He hated that phone. It existed for one purpose: emergencies. And in his world, any contact was an emergency because he had arranged his life so that no one had reason to contact him at all. He walked inside, boots heavy on the wooden floor, and picked up the receiver. "Caleb, oh, thank goodness I caught you." The voice was thin, crackly with static, but he knew it. Ruth Halverson, his nearest neighbor, 12 miles down the mountain. She was a kind woman in her mid-60s, Norwegian stock. The sort of person who left food on your porch without knocking because she understood that some people needed feeding more than they needed conversation. She had been doing this for Caleb since Marin died, and he had never once thanked her, and she had never once expected him to. "Ruth, what's wrong? It's this storm, hun. The forecast is just awful. I've got renters in the Aspen cabin, or I'm supposed to. A young couple. They were supposed to check in this afternoon, but I haven't heard a peep. I'm stuck down in Lander." Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew the Aspen cabin. It was 5 miles from his place by the logging road, maybe 2 miles, as the crow flies cutting straight through the woods. Small A-frame summer-weight construction. No generator, no wood stove. Fine for July, a death trap in October. "What do you need, Ruth? Could you just check on it?" "I'm worried sick. If they're not there, just make sure the door is locked tight. If they are, tell them the emergency kit is under the sink. I just have a bad feeling." He looked through the window. The first fat, wet snowflakes had begun drifting past the glass. Lazy and deceptive, the advanced scouts of something much worse. This was a bad idea. It was the exact opposite of everything his life was designed to be. Leaving his fortress, involving himself, interacting with people who might want to interact back. But Ruth was the only person who had shown him kindness since Marin passed. She had earned this. She had earned it with 4.5 years of pies left on porches and silences left unbroken. "I'm heading out now, Ruth. I'll check. You stay safe." "Bless you, Caleb. I mean it." He hung up without another word, grabbed his keys, looked at the dog. "Echo, load up." The shepherd's ears perked. A change in routine. He bounded ahead, waiting by the door of the old pickup truck, his body vibrating with the controlled alertness of an animal who understood that when the routine changed, the stakes went up. The drive was slow. The logging road was already slick, the heavy snow beginning to cover the mud and turn every curve into a guessing game. Caleb's hands were steady on the wheel. His eyes scanned the tree line, a habit from a different life that he couldn't break and had stopped trying to. Echo sat rigid in the passenger seat, head high, nose working the air, coming through the heating vents, cataloging scents the way an intelligence analyst catalogs signals. After 20 minutes of careful driving, they pulled up to the Aspen cabin. It was dark. No lights, no car in the drive. The small A-frame sat back in the trees, its windows black, its porch empty. "They're not here," Caleb said. Relief loosened something in his chest. Good. He was halfway out of the truck when the world behind him exploded. Echo hit the passenger window with the force of a wrecking ball. His deep, rapid barks were muffled by the glass, but the fury behind them was unmistakable. This was not a warning bark. This was not the alert bark he used when a coyote crossed the property line. This was a five-alarm fire. His paws scrambled at the door, his claws leaving white scratches in the plastic trim, his entire body a convulsion of desperate urgency. Caleb had never seen Echo do this. Not once. Not in 3 years. "Echo, knock it off." The dog only got louder. His barks turned into howls, a sound so raw and so primal that the hair on the back of Caleb's neck stood up. A cold dread settled in his stomach. He walked back to the truck and opened the passenger door. Echo shot out like a gray bullet. He ignored the surrounding woods, ignored the perimeter. He ran straight to the cabin's front door, reared up on his hind legs, and slammed both front paws into the wood with a thud that echoed off the trees. He clawed at the paint. He barked with a ferocity that made Caleb's hand automatically move to his hip, though he hadn't carried a sidearm in 10 years. "What is it, boy?" Caleb joined the dog on the porch. His senses were fully awake now, the old combat wiring lighting up like a switchboard. No tracks on the porch, but the snow was coming down hard. Any tracks from earlier in the day would be gone. "Hello, anyone here? This is Caleb Mercer. Ruth Halverson asked me to check the cabin." Echo whined, a high, desperate sound. He clawed at the door again. "Okay, okay." Caleb put his gloved hand on the doorknob. It was unlocked. His training took over. He pushed the door open slowly, one hand on the frame, his body bladed to the side. The interior was freezing, darker than it should have been. The air was heavy with cold, and something else, a faint perfume, expensive floral, completely out of place in a hunting cabin in the Wyoming backcountry. "Hello," Echo pushed past him. The dog moved into the main room with his nose low and his hackles half raised, and Caleb followed every nerve in his body singing. And then he saw her. She was huddled in the far corner, almost invisible in the gloom. She was sitting in a modern lightweight wheelchair. One of the large wheels was bent at a sickening angle, the spokes broken as if someone had kicked it or thrown it sideways with considerable force. She was wrapped in one of the cabin's thin, decorative blankets, the kind that looks nice draped over a chair, but provides about as much warmth as a handkerchief. Her blonde hair was matted and tangled. Her face was pale. Her lips were blue. She was shivering so violently that the entire wheelchair rattled softly on the wooden floor. Caleb stopped. His mind tried to process the scene. He looked at the woman. He looked at the broken wheelchair. He looked at the empty driveway through the window behind her. Echo approached her slowly, his barks replaced by a low, questioning whine. He sniffed the air near her, his head tilting, his body language shifting from alarm to something more complicated. He was reading her the way he had been trained to read rooms and packages and roadside debris, looking for the thing that didn't belong, the signal hidden inside the noise. "Please don't hurt me." Her voice was a dry rasp, barely a whisper. "I'm not going to hurt you." Caleb took a slow step forward, his hands visible, his voice softer than he intended. "I'm Caleb, Ruth Halverson's neighbor. Are you hurt?" "He left me." She stammered, tears freezing on her pale cheeks. "My fiancé, Dominic. We had a fight. He pushed me. The chair broke. He took the car and drove away. He said I was worthless." She gestured feebly at the destroyed wheelchair. Her hands were shaking so hard the gesture was more of a tremor than a movement. Caleb looked at her, then at the useless chair, then out the window at the snow, which was no longer drifting. It was a whiteout. The trees 20 feet from the cabin had disappeared. This cabin had no firewood, no generator, no insulation worth the name. The pipes would freeze within hours. After that, the temperature inside would drop below freezing. She wouldn't last the night. His own cabin was 2 miles through the woods. It was built with stone walls and a fireplace large enough to heat a barn. It had a generator, a wood stove, and enough supplies for a month. He was a man who wanted nothing to do with the world. But the world had just landed on his doorstep, blue-lipped and shaking in a broken chair. He sighed, a long, frustrated breath that turned into a cloud of white vapor in the frigid air. Right, here's what's going to happen. We're not staying here. My place is 2 miles through the woods. It's warm. It's safe. She flinched as he approached. I can't. The chair, I see that. He knelt in front of her. His gray eyes met hers, and there was nothing gentle in them, but there was nothing cruel either. Just a flat, practical assessment. I'm going to pick you up. We're going to my truck. But the road's already bad. If the truck can't make it back, we walk. Do you understand? She stared at him, seemingly unable to process what was happening. Her body was shaking apart with cold. I'm not asking, ma'am. We're going. He slid one arm under her legs, the other behind her back. She was lighter than he expected, almost frail. She let out a small, terrified gasp, but didn't fight him. He lifted her easily, the blanket still wrapped around her. Echo, heel. The shepherd, his duty as an alarm system now complete, fell into position at Caleb's left side. Precise, military, ready. Caleb carried the woman to his truck. The snow was coming down so hard now that the cab was already covered. He set her in the passenger seat, buckled her in, and drove. He made it 1 mile before the road disappeared. The snow had filled the ruts and the ditches and the gaps between the trees until everything was a single white plain with no edges and no depth. The truck slid sideways, caught a rut, and stopped. The engine whined. The tires spun. Nothing. Caleb sat for 3 seconds. He did not curse. He did not pound the steering wheel. He processed the information the way he had been trained to process information: input, assessment, action. We walk from here. He turned off the engine, got out, opened her door, picked her up again. Echo jumped from the truck bed and pressed against Caleb's leg. The last mile was a fight. The wind tried to rip her from his arms. The snow was so thick he navigated by the slope of the ground under his boots. Marin had taught him to read this mountain, every ridge and dip and drainage, and he heard her voice now in the back of his mind as clear as if she were walking beside him. Left at the big granite boulder, down the slope, follow the creek bed. You'll feel the ground flatten when you are close. He moved with a grim, relentless pace, his head down, his body shielding hers. Echo stayed pressed against his left leg, a warm, steady presence in the howling white chaos. The dog didn't falter, didn't hesitate. He was doing what he had been trained to do, move through hostile terrain beside the person who mattered. Something Caleb didn't notice in the moment, something he would remember later and turn over in his mind like a stone with a sharp edge: the woman's hands. They were gripping the collar of his jacket, not weakly, not with the desperate scrabbling of a person in panic, but with a specific, coordinated strength. Her fingers adjusted their grip as he shifted her weight. Her body compensated when he changed direction, her core engaging, her weight redistributing to make his job easier. It was subtle, but it was there. And for a man who had spent 12 years training his senses to detect the thing that didn't belong, it was a signal. One he filed away without conscious thought, the way you file away the sound of a branch breaking in a forest that should be still. He kicked the front door of his cabin open with his boot. The heavy oak swung inward. The sound of the world changed instantly. The deafening shriek of the wind was replaced by a deep, resonant moan from the chimney and the pop and hiss of the fire he'd banked before leaving. Echo scrambled inside, first claws clicking on the hardwood floor, and shook a cloud of snow from his thick coat. Caleb followed. He slammed the door shut with his boot and threw the deadbolt. Warmth, silence, safety. All right, I'm putting you on the couch. He carried her to a worn, overstuffed sofa that faced the massive stone fireplace. He set her down without ceremony. She landed on the cushions and immediately pressed her lips together. her face tightening against a wave of sensation. Her legs were tingling, not the numbness of cold, but the sharp burning pins and needles of blood returning to extremities that had been starved of circulation. She caught herself, smoothed her expression. But there had been a flash, a fraction of a second where pain had crossed her features, the specific pain of feeling returning to limbs, and Caleb, who was already at the fireplace adding logs to the embers, did not see it. But if he had, he might have wondered a woman who can't feel her legs shouldn't feel pins and needles. He used the bellows to coax the embers into a blaze. Within minutes, heat was rolling across the room in waves. "Stay," he said. The woman flinched before she realized he was speaking to Echo. The dog, who had been circling her with his nose low, immediately retreated to a circular rug by the hearth. He lay down, front paws crossed, head up. His gray eyes were fixed on her, unblinking, analytical. He was not growling, not threatening. He was watching, the way a security camera watches a hallway, recording everything, deciding nothing yet. Caleb disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a heavy ceramic mug. "Coffee. Hot. Drink it. Thank you," she whispered. Her hands, when she reached for the mug, were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. He knelt. His movements were sure, impersonal, clinical. He took her small, frozen hands in his own. His were rough, calloused, and radiated a warmth that felt almost painful against her ice-white skin. He closed her fingers around the mug, forced her to grip it, hold it, feel the heat. "Drink." She obeyed. The coffee was scalding and bitter, and it burned a trail down her throat and lit a small fire in the center of her chest. "My chair," she said, trying to steady her voice. He broke it. "I can't." Caleb stood. "It's in the truck. Truck's a mile back. It's useless in this." He nodded toward the window. The snow was already 3 feet deep against the glass. "You're not going anywhere." His tone wasn't cruel. It was the voice of a man stating an undeniable physical fact, the same way he might say the sun sets in the west or rocks fall downward. He was not interested in her feelings about the fact. The fact existed regardless. He went to a closet and pulled out 2 thick wool blankets. They were clean but old, the color of oatmeal, the edges bound in faded satin that had gone soft with decades of washing. He dropped one on her lap. "The cold is in your bones. Get out of the wet clothes. Wrap this around you." He turned his back, giving her privacy. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons of her coat. It was a designer piece, Italian cashmere blend, the kind of coat that came with its own garment bag, and a price tag that would have paid Caleb's property taxes for 3 years. The lie she was living felt heavy and clumsy as she struggled with the buttons. "I can't," she said. "My legs. I can't do it alone." Caleb paused, let out a long, slow breath through his nose. He turned back. His gray eyes were hard measuring, and she felt something she hadn't felt from a man in years, the sensation of being looked at without calculation. He wasn't evaluating her attractiveness or her net worth or her usefulness. He was assessing a problem. The blanket, wrap it over everything. "We need to get your core temperature up." He didn't offer to help her undress. He just watched with an unreadable expression as she struggled to drape the heavy wool over her damp clothes. When she was done, he gave a short nod and moved on. He checked windows, secured shutters. The wind hammered the cabin from every direction, a physical assault that made the walls groan. The lights flickered twice, then went out, plunging the room into the warm, dancing glow of the fireplace. Caleb didn't hesitate. He lit 2 oil lamps with the practiced ease of a man who had done it 1,000 times. "Generator will kick in if we need it," he said, "but I prefer the quiet." The quiet. That was the word that defined this place. The only sounds were the roar of the wind outside, the crackle and pop of the fire, and the cushed rhythmic breathing of the dog. Echo had not moved from his rug. His eyes had not left the woman on the couch. His vigilance was pure, unwavering, and deeply unnerving. It was the judgment of an animal who operated on information no human could access, who read the world through a spectrum of scent and sound and subtle energy that was as real and as reliable to him as printed words on a page. She couldn't charm him. She couldn't bribe him. And she couldn't lie to him. Not really. Not where it counted. This was when the true weight of her deception began to settle on her. Her name was Lena Ashford. Her net worth was a number that appeared annually in Forbes magazine. She sat huddled in a stranger's cabin, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, her lie draped over her like a second skin. She looked around. No art on the walls. Shelves made of reclaimed barnwood filled with worn-out paperbacks, their spines cracked. She saw books on diesel engine repair, Wyoming geology, and Greek philosophy. There was no marble, no chrome, no glass. The floor was scarred hardwood, uneven with age, but clean. The furniture was old and solid and maintained with the quiet care of a man who fixed things rather than replaced them. Her eyes landed on the mantelpiece, a single slab of rough-hewn pine, one object on it, a framed photograph. It showed Caleb, younger, smiling. The smile transformed his face so completely that he looked like a different person, someone who had not yet learned that the world could take the one thing that made it worth enduring. His arm was around a woman with bright, intelligent eyes and sun-streaked hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wasn't posing, she was laughing at something just off camera. Her head tilted, her body leaning into his as naturally as a tree leans toward light. Marin. This cabin was not a house designed to impress. It was not a house built to display wealth or taste or status. It was a house built to survive. And it was a shrine. Caleb Mercer, this suspicious, hardened man, had brought her into his home without question. He had carried her out of the cold, given her warmth, given her coffee, and demanded nothing in return. His kindness was not a transaction. It was a reflex, as basic and as powerful as breathing. She in turn had brought a lie into this place. She who could buy 100 of these cabins and not notice the expense was pretending to have nothing. She was using paralysis as a shield, helplessness as a weapon. And here in the face of this Spartan, honest reality, her lie felt like something obscene. A cheap, gaudy jewel placed on a rough wooden altar. It was heavy, and it was cold. And she was beginning to feel the first faint stirrings of a sensation she hadn't felt in years. Shame. Thank you, she whispered again. But this time the words weren't for the coffee. Caleb was standing by the window, his back to her, looking out at the white void. For what? For helping me. Don't thank me. His voice was flat. I didn't do it for you. I did it for Ruth. And I did it for the dog. He glanced at Echo. He doesn't like to see things freeze. He turned. His gray eyes met hers, and there was a wall behind them so high and so solid that she understood immediately and completely that this man had not let another human being past it in a very long time. We're trapped here. The plows won't run this road for at least 3 days, maybe a week. He walked over, picked up the second blanket, and dropped it on Echo. The dog buried his nose under it and sighed, though his eyes remained open, fixed on Lena. Get some sleep. The fire needs to be fed every 2 hours. I'll take first watch. He picked up a rifle from beside the door, checked the action with a smooth, practiced motion, and set it back down within reach. Then he sat in an old wooden rocking chair, opened a book, and began to read. Lena Ashford, whose last name commanded boardrooms and whose trust fund could reshape small economies, pulled the worn wool blanket to her chin and closed her eyes. She was trapped. Not by the storm, not by the broken wheelchair, but by the quiet, devastating decency of the man across the room and the unblinking stare of his dog. The lie had never felt heavier. The second day of the storm was a lesson in silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that presses down on you like wet snow on a tin roof, heavy, suffocating, and full of weight you can't see. Outside, the world had ceased to exist. There was no sky, no mountain, no tree line. just a screaming white void that threw itself against the cabin from every direction, scouring the windows, piling drifts that were already swallowing the porch railings. The wind didn't howl. It shrieked a high, relentless pitch that wormed into your skull and stayed there. Inside, the silence was different. It was human. Caleb moved through the cabin like a man following a script only he could read. He rose before the darkness lifted, fed the fire 3 logs positioned with the precision of someone who understood exactly how long each one would burn, pulled on his leather jacket, opened the front door against a wall of white, shoveled a narrow trench to the woodshed, returned with an armload of split pine snow crusted in his beard, his eyelashes frosted white. He stamped his boots on the threshold, set the wood by the hearth, removed his jacket. He did not look at Lena. He made coffee. 1 mug. The scrape of the spoon against ceramic was the loudest sound in the room. He set a bowl of hot oatmeal on the small table near the couch, a bottle of water beside it. He said nothing. Lena ate. Guilt was a bitter second flavor in every bite. She watched him move. Every action was stripped to its essential purpose. No wasted motion, no unnecessary sound. She had grown up around men who performed competence, men who straightened their cuffs before a board meeting, men who leaned back in leather chairs and made you wait before they spoke because the waiting was the point. Caleb didn't perform anything. He simply functioned. The fire needed fuel. He fed it. The path needed clearing. He cleared it. The woman on his couch needed food. He provided it. There was no warmth in the giving, but there was no cruelty in it either. It was reflex, the deep automatic kind, that 12 years in the United States Marine Corps had carved into muscle and bone. "How long do you think this will last?" Lena asked, her voice thin, desperate to break the weight of the quiet. Caleb was checking the seal on the back window. He paused, looked over his shoulder. His gray eyes gave her nothing. Days. He turned back to his work. The conversation was over. Her world was now a 20-foot rectangle between the fireplace and the kitchen counter. Her only companions were a man who wouldn't speak and a dog who wouldn't stop watching. Echo was always there. When Caleb went outside, the dog lay by the front door, not guarding Lena, but holding the position until his master returned. Ears forward, body coiled. A gray sentinel waiting for the one person whose footsteps meant the world was still in order. When Caleb was inside, Echo moved to his rug by the hearth. Head up, ears swiveling, those big radar dish ears that tracked every rustle of blanket, every shift of weight, every small sound Lena made on the couch. He watched her the way a trained animal watches an unclassified variable. Not aggressive, not threatening, just recording. Lena knew dogs. Her world was full of them. Pomeranians tucked into designer bags at charity galas. Labradoodles with spa appointments and organic meal plans. Miniature schnauzers in cashmere sweaters with Instagram accounts. This was not those dogs. Echo was a former military working dog who had been discharged because the things he'd seen had broken something inside him, the same way they had broken something inside the man who adopted him. Echo didn't wag his tail for strangers. He didn't roll over. He didn't perform joy. He assessed. He calculated. He decided. And for 2 days, he had decided that Lena Ashford was a variable he hadn't classified yet. But what Echo could not do, what no amount of military training could teach, was lie. And what he could detect with a precision that no human sense could match was the chemical signature of genuine distress. Fear smells different from deception. Pain smells different from performance. In grief, real grief has a scent that cuts through everything else like smoke through clean air. On the first afternoon when Caleb was in the back room sharpening a knife and the grating sound was scraping Lena's nerves raw, she tried to make contact. "Hey, Echo," she whispered. The dog's head tilted, his ears pivoted toward her. "It's quite a storm, huh? I'm glad you and your dad found me." Echo stared at her. He did not wag his tail. He did not stand up. He offered her nothing. At dinner, canned stew heated on the wood stove, she tried again. Caleb put a bowl down for her, then filled Echo's dish. The dog sat perfectly still, not moving toward the food until Caleb gave a low, quiet command. Lena, holding her own bowl, broke off a small piece of the dried bread Caleb had given her and held it out. "Here, boy." Echo looked from her hand to Caleb. "He's not a stray," Caleb said, his voice sharp from the shadows by the stove. "He eats from his bowl." Lena's face flushed hot. She retracted her hand and placed the bread back in her stew. "I'm sorry, just eat." Not unkindly, but final. The silence that followed was heavier than before. The second night was worse. The storm seemed to gain a new furious energy after dark, as if the daylight hours had been merely a rehearsal. The cabin walls groaned, the shutters rattled against their bolts. Somewhere above, a branch cracked and fell against the roof with a sound like a gunshot. Lena lay on the couch wrapped in the wool blankets. She couldn't sleep, not because of the storm, because of the lie. Her body ached, not from her fabricated paralysis, but from the real physical strain of maintaining it. Every muscle in her legs screamed from forced stillness. Her lower back throbbed. Her hips burned. She wanted to stand. She wanted to stretch. She wanted to walk to the kitchen and pour herself a glass of water like a normal human being. But she couldn't, because the moment her feet touched the floor, the moment her legs bore her weight, the entire structure of her deception would collapse. And so she lay there, a prisoner, not of the wheelchair, not of the storm, but of her own lie. Caleb was on his cot by the door. His rifle leaned against the wall beside him. He lay on his back still as stone, but she could feel his wakefulness radiating through the dark like heat from an unseen fire. He didn't sleep. He waited. It was a habit burned into his nervous system by years of service, in places where closing your eyes meant someone might not open theirs. Sometime after midnight, Lena began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was the kind of crying that starts in the throat and stays there, a tightening that you try to swallow back down but can't. A single hot tear escaped and slid down her cold cheek. She brushed it away. Another followed, then another. She turned her face toward the dark window, the glass a black mirror reflecting the faint red pulse of dying embers, and pressed her fist against her mouth. She made no sound. It was a silent, desperate collapse, the full weight of everything crashing down at once. She wasn't crying because she was cold or scared or alone. She was crying because she had become someone she didn't recognize. Lena Ashford, whose last name appeared in Forbes, whose trust fund could purchase every cabin on this mountain range and still leave enough for the one next to it, was pretending to have nothing. She was using paralysis as a shield, using helplessness as a strategy. She had designed this lie as a test for Dominic Varenas, her fiancé, a precise clinical experiment to determine whether his love was real or transactional. Would he come back for a woman who couldn't walk? Would he stay for someone who had nothing to offer but herself? The answer had been swift and devastating. He had left her in a freezing cabin without a backward glance. But the lie hadn't died with Dominic's departure. It had followed her here into this cabin, into the home of a man who lived by a code so simple and so absolute that her deception felt like graffiti on a cathedral wall. Caleb Mercer did not lie. He didn't perform. He didn't calculate. He fed the fire because it was cold. He brought her food because she was hungry. He checked the windows because the storm was dangerous. Everything in this cabin was exactly what it appeared to be. Everything except her. She thought of the photograph on the mantelpiece. Caleb Younger smiling his arm around the woman with the bright eyes. Marin, a geologist who understood rocks and time. A woman who chose this mountain because the stone beneath it had been here for 2.7 billion years. Lena had brought a lie into this woman's house. The tears came harder now, though she still made no sound. She was crying not for her lost fortune, not for her failed engagement, not for the call, but for the fact that she had to deceive the first person in years who had shown her kindness without asking what it was worth. And then a sound cut through the storm. Click, 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 claws on hardwood. Across the room on his cot, Caleb's hands stilled. He had heard it too. Lena held her breath. She slowly turned her head. Echo was standing. He had left his rug by the hearth, left his post. He was looking at her, his head tilted slightly, his silver gray fur catching the last ember light. But the look in his eyes was different from the past 2 days. The assessment was gone. The calculation was over. He took a step, then another, slowly, deliberately. Not the cautious approach of a suspicious animal, but the measured, purposeful walk of a creature who had made a decision and was not going to unmake it. He stopped beside the couch, sniffed the air near her face. His dark, intelligent eyes moved across her features, reading something no human could see. He did not see a paralyzed woman. He did not see a billionaire. He smelled what was real, the salt of genuine tears, the cortisol of authentic shame, the unmistakable chemical truth of a heart in genuine distress. Dogs don't understand money. They don't understand social performance. They understand one thing with absolute devastating clarity: pain. And the pain pouring off this woman was not fabricated. It couldn't be. The body doesn't lie the way the mouth does. Echo pushed his cold, damp nose under Lena's trembling hand, the hand that was clutching the blanket like a lifeline. She flinched. A small gasp escaped her. He nudged again, more insistent this time. And then with a long, slow sigh that seemed to release every molecule of tension in the room, Echo laid his heavy, broad head directly on her lap. His eyes closed. It was surrender, complete, unconditional. For a long moment, Lena was frozen. The weight of his head on her legs was warm, solid, alive. Then slowly her hand lifted from the blanket and came to rest on top of his skull. Her fingers sank into the thick, warm ruff of silver gray fur. He leaned into the touch, a barely perceptible shift, and sighed again. On the other side of the room, Caleb Mercer lay absolutely still. He did not move. He barely breathed. His knuckles were white where they gripped the edge of his cot. He was watching his dog. Echo, the animal who had not offered his trust to a single living soul since Marin died. The dog who was his shadow, his partner, his last line of defense against a world that had taken everything else. Echo, who had been a shell since she passed, just as Caleb was a shell, had just laid his head in the lap of a stranger. Caleb looked from the dog to the woman, and for the first time in 2 days, the hard, suspicious set of his face softened, not into warmth, not into trust, into confusion, deep, profound confusion. Echo had chosen, and Caleb didn't know what that meant. Morning, the storm's violent screaming had settled into a heavy, suffocating stillness. The snow was no longer falling. It was simply there, a 6-foot white wall past every window, casting the cabin in a dim gray twilight. When Lena opened her eyes stiff and cold, the first thing she saw was Echo. He was not on his rug by the hearth. He was asleep on the floor beside the couch, his gray head resting near her feet. When Caleb emerged from the back room, he stopped in the doorway, his gaze locked on the dog's position. He looked at Lena, and for the first time, the suspicion in his eyes was replaced by something else. Not trust, not acceptance, bewilderment. Echo had chosen. And Echo's choices had meant something once when Marin was alive. The dog had loved Marin first, had chosen Marin first, and now he had chosen again. When Lena stirred, Echo's tail thumped twice against the wooden floor. He lifted his head, nudged her hand, let out a low, quiet whine. Caleb watched. He made coffee. 2 mugs this time, though his hand paused for a moment before filling the second. He brought hers over. His hand lingered as Echo pushed his head under Lena's other hand, demanding attention. "He seems to have made a decision," Lena whispered, her voice rough with sleep. "He's a dog," Caleb said. The words were curt, but the edge that had been there for 2 days was blunted. "He doesn't know any better." But he did, and Caleb knew it. Echo was the last living piece of his old life, the last thread connecting him to the woman in the photograph. For Echo to open up to this stranger, it was either a betrayal or a miracle. He wasn't ready to decide which. The day wore on in this new fragile truce. The snow had stopped, but they were buried. Drifts pressed against the windows, casting everything in a dim underwater light. Caleb spent the morning outside, the rhythmic scrape of his shovel, the only sound clearing the porch, the path to the woodshed, a small area for Echo. Lena was alone in the main room, and she was trapped. Caleb had retrieved her broken wheelchair from the truck the previous day before the road became completely impassable, dragging it the last quarter mile through the snow on a makeshift sled of plywood. It sat in the corner now, a mangled piece of modern engineering, its bent wheel a testament to the violence that had supposedly put her in it. She was confined to the couch or to dragging herself to the small adjacent bathroom, a humiliating, exhausting process she performed only when she was certain Caleb was occupied elsewhere. The cabin, which had felt like a refuge, now felt like a cage. And the cage had a specific architectural feature: three shallow, wide wooden steps that separated the sunken living room from the kitchen and front door. 3 steps. In her charade, they were as impassable as the mountains outside. She stared at them, stared at the front door beyond them. She wanted to see the sky. She wanted to breathe air that wasn't recycled through old wood and stone. She felt the claustrophobia pressing down on her like a vice. Caleb returned, snow-caked in his beard, clinging to his eyelashes. He stamped his boots, shed his jacket. He didn't look at her, but he saw her. He saw her staring at the 3 steps, her gaze fixed on the front door, as if it were a portal to another universe. He saw the helplessness, and for the first time, he didn't see it as a burden. He didn't see it as an inconvenience. He saw it as a problem to be solved. He walked past her, poured a mug of coffee, stood in the kitchen for a full minute staring at the 3 steps, then at the wheelchair, then at the steps again. Then without a single word, he set his mug down, walked to the storage closet, pulled out a measuring tape. He went to the steps, measured their height, measured their width, wrote the numbers on a scrap of wood with a carpenter's pencil. He opened the front door, stepped out into the white world, disappeared. Lena listened. She heard the door to his workshop, a smaller building attached to the woodshed, creak open. Then silence. It was broken minutes later by the sharp, rhythmic rasp of a handsaw cutting through lumber. Lena's heart seemed to stop. She knew that sound. She had overseen the construction of 3 homes, 2 of them from the foundation up. She knew what it meant when a man picked up a saw and started cutting without asking questions first. It meant he had already figured out the answer. The sawing continued for an hour, steady, determined, a meditation against the backdrop of wind. It was joined by the whine of a drill, then the careful, muffled thud of a hammer, each blow deliberately softened as if he was conscious of disturbing the quiet. Lena sat on the couch, her hands clasped in her lap. The lie was a cold stone in her stomach. He was building. He hadn't asked her what she needed. He hadn't consulted. He hadn't weighed the inconvenience against the effort. He had simply looked at the steps, looked at her, and started cutting wood. Dominic Varenz would have called a concierge service. He would have hired a contractor. He would have made a phone call, checked his watch, and expected results within the hour. Caleb Mercer solved problems with his hands and his silence. 2 hours later, he returned. His face was flushed red from the cold. His beard was dusted with sawdust. Across his arms, he carried a long, simple, ugly ramp, raw plywood on 2x4 supports. It was heavy, but he handled it the way he handled everything, without complaint and without ceremony. He didn't speak. He maneuvered it through the door, positioned it over the 3 steps, and locked it into place. The wood groaned slightly, settling into its new purpose. He stepped back, wiped his hands on his jeans. It'll hold. Then he walked over to the broken wheelchair, inspected the bent wheel, and with a grunt of effort used his bare hands to bend the metal frame back into something roughly circular. The wheel wobbled, but it would roll. He pushed the chair in front of her. "Let's go." The transfer from a couch to wheelchair was clumsy. He helped his hands strong and sure on her arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. He pushed her up the ramp. The wood groaned but held exactly as he'd said. Through the doorway, onto the porch. The air hit her first. It was so cold it felt like a slap, but clean, sharp, alive. It smelled of pine and ozone and frozen earth. The world was a blinding, sculpted white drifts like frozen ocean waves, a sky a pale, bruised gray stretching to the edges of everything. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. And she had seen private islands and alpine chalets and sunsets from the deck of a 90-foot yacht. None of it compared to this. Caleb stood beside her, not touching her, not speaking, just sharing the space. Echo sat at his other side, warm breath pluming in the cold air. "You didn't have to do that," Lena said. Her voice was quiet. "Had to do something. Can't just sit. Not good to just sit. No one has ever done something like that for me." He frowned. "Done what built a ramp. It's just wood. It's practical." "It was kind," she whispered. He leaned against the railing, crossed his arms, changed the subject. "Storm's breaking. We'll be dug out in a few days." They stood and sat in the clean, cold silence for a long time. The only sounds were the wind, now a gentle whisper, and the slow drip of snow melting from the eaves. "Why do you live out here?" she asked. All alone, Caleb didn't answer for a full minute. He watched a Stellar's jade land on a snow-covered branch, shake itself, and fly away. "I'm not alone," he nodded toward Echo. "You know what I mean." He sighed. It was a heavy sound, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the entire mountain range. "I live here because it's the only place that makes sense. The world out there," he gestured vaguely toward the invisible civilization beyond the mountains. "It's too loud, too fast. People don't listen." He paused, then continued, his voice dropping into something softer, something Lena hadn't heard before. "My wife, Marin, she loved this mountain. She was a geologist, studied the Precambrian formations in the Wind River Range. She understood quiet things, rocks, time, things that last." He touched the rough-hewn log that had supported the porch roof. The gesture was unconscious, intimate, the way you touch something that belongs to someone you lost. "We built this place together after my last deployment. It was supposed to be our fortress, our quiet place." He fell silent. Lena waited. She knew the way you know when someone is standing at the edge of something they haven't said in a very long time, that there was more. She passed 4 years ago, March 2021. He said it flatly, the way you state a fact that has been true for so long, it has worn smooth in your mouth. Cancer, pancreatic, diagnosed November 2020, right in the middle of COVID. He exhaled sharply. They had visitor restrictions at the hospital in Riverton. "I sat in the parking lot, called her on the phone, listened to her die through a speaker because they wouldn't let me inside. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to stop. The quiet here, it's different now, but it's all I have left of her." He looked at Lena. His eyes were raw, not with tears, but with the kind of openness that costs a man like Caleb Mercer everything he has. "I'm not hiding out here. I'm just trying to hold on to the quiet. This," he tapped the log, "is all that's left." Lena looked at the ramp, the simple, ugly, perfect ramp he had built with cold hands and aching knees. "Marin," she said, testing the name. She must have been something special. She was practical. And for the first time, a small, genuine smile touched his lips. It transformed his entire face. The hard lines softened. The gray eyes warmed, and for a brief, devastating second, she saw the man who had existed before the grief, before the quiet, before he became a monument to his own loss. She would have built the ramp in half the time. And in that moment, Lena's lie felt like a violation of something sacred. She was sitting on a ramp he'd built for her, wearing clothes that had belonged to his dead wife, listening to him say Marin's name for the first time in 4.5 years. and every word she had spoken to him was false. That night the storm returned for a final violent encore. The wind howled, the shutters rattled, the fire crackled and popped. Echo lay beside the couch, his new position chosen of his own will. A gray shadow near the woman who had for 3 days shown him nothing but quiet, gentle hands. It was deep in the night, past midnight, into those hours where the world holds its breath between one day and the next. Caleb was on his cot, his back to the room, his breathing slow but controlled, the shallow, vigilant rest of a man whose nervous system had never fully stood down. A sound pulled him to the surface. Not the storm, not the house settling. A soft, clean clink, glass on stone. The sound of a water glass being set on the kitchen counter. His eyes opened. His body went rigid. His hand moved in the darkness, bypassing the rifle, finding the heavy metal flashlight on the floor beside his cot. His first thought, animal. Raccoon. Martin. Something that found a gap. He rose without a sound, bare feet on cold wood. He moved past the couch. The blankets were in a heap. She was not there. He thumbed the switch on the flashlight. A bright white beam cut through the darkness, flooding the kitchen, and the light found her. She was standing, not leaning, not bracing, not struggling, standing, perfectly, casually, both feet planted firmly on the floor, one hand resting lightly on the window frame, the other stretched above her head, rotating her shoulder, working out a knot, the unconscious, comfortable gesture of a woman who had been standing her entire life. The beam froze on her. Caleb's world tilted. The air left his lungs stolen by a sudden icy vacuum that had nothing to do with temperature. In the white circle of the flashlight, every detail was mercilessly clear. Her feet on the floor, her legs bearing her weight, her body moving with the easy, natural balance of someone who had never known a wheelchair. And in his mind, everything ran backward. The ramp, his hands calloused and cracked gripping the handsaw, the plywood, the 2x4s, his knees protesting as he knelt on frozen concrete to secure the supports. 2 hours in the cold. For her, the wheelchair, bending the metal frame back with his bare hands, the sharp edges cutting into his palms, the porch, the conversation. Marin's name leaving his mouth for the first time in 4.5 years. The vulnerability of it, the cost of it, the way his chest had cracked open and his voice had gone soft and he had stood there exposed, telling this woman about his dead wife. For this, for a liar. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He was a statue, his arm locked the flashlight beam, steady as a surgeon's blade. Lena didn't realize she'd been caught. She was lost in the moment, the relief of standing, the blood flowing in her legs, the simple physical joy of being vertical after days of forced immobility. The storm outside the window was mesmerizing. The sudden bright light on her back was a physical blow. She froze. She turned slowly. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes went wide, the same terror she'd shown in the Aspen cabin. But this time the terror was real. Caleb. He did not answer. The silence in the cabin was absolute. The kind of silence that has weight and fills your lungs until you can't breathe. And then a new sound entered. A soft woof, Echo asleep at the foot of the couch, lifted his head. He blinked, confused by the light and the tension. He stood up, stretched a long, full-body stretch, his front paws sliding forward, his back arching. He let out a small, sleepy yawn. He looked at Caleb, dark statue by the door. He looked at Lena, standing in the kitchen, and his dog brain processed the scene. And what it processed was wonderful. The sad woman, the one who sat all day, the one who gave the best scratches behind his ears, the one whose lap was warm and whose tears tasted like salt and sorrow. She was standing. She was up. This was in the pure, uncomplicated algebra of a dog's heart. The best possible news. A low, excited rumble started in his chest. His tail began to move. One hesitant wag. then another, then a full enthusiastic sweep. He trotted forward, claws clicking on the hardwood. He pushed his head against Lena's leg, looked up at her mouth open in a happy pant, looked back at Caleb. She's up, look, she's standing. And then Echo let out a single bright, playful bark. The sound was obscene. It was the sound of pure, innocent joy, and it detonated in the deadly silence of Caleb's betrayal. Like a grenade in a room full of broken glass, his loyal, damaged, grieving partner, the animal who had been his only truth for 3 years, was wagging his tail at the lie. Echo, no, Lena whispered, her hands shaking as she tried to push his head away. The dog, confused, thought she was playing. He dodged her hand and barked again. Short, sharp, inviting. Play with me. Caleb stood in the darkness. He watched his dog celebrate the woman who had just shattered every fragile thread of trust he had allowed himself to extend. He did not speak, he did not yell. With a slow, deliberate movement, he lowered the flashlight. The beam dropped from her face to the floor. Then with a final sharp click, he turned the light off. The cabin was plunged back into total darkness. Only the faint red glow of dying embers. Only the wind and the confused, happy panting of a dog who had just illuminated a truth that neither human in the room was prepared to face. Dawn arrived not as a sunrise, but as a change in the quality of the darkness. The sky shifted from black to gray. The storm, having finally exhausted itself, was over. In the cabin, the betrayal was deafening. Caleb had been up since before the light. His movements were rigid, precise, mechanical. The man who had stood on the porch yesterday, his chest cracked open, his voice soft with memory, that man was gone. In his place was the Marine, cold, efficient, operational. He fed the fire, made coffee, one mug, fed Echo, did not look at Lena. She sat on the edge of the couch, her feet on the floor. The lie was over. No point in pretending. She was dressed in the clothes he had given her, Marin's clothes, and the weight of that fact settled on her shoulders like iron. Echo was a knot of confused energy. He whined, moved between them, nudged. Caleb's hand was ignored, trotted to Lena, resting his head on her knee, looked back at Caleb. His body language was a desperate canine question. Why is the air wrong? Why won't you look at each other? What happened? Caleb, Lena began. Don't. The word was flat, devoid of anger, devoid of anything. It was the sound of a door being locked from the inside. He pulled on his boots, grabbed a shovel, went outside. Lena watched through the window as he dug with a contained, furious energy that turned shoveling into something close to violence. She watched him reach the porch, find the ramp he had built for her. He kicked it. The wood cracked. He picked it up, the entire structure, plywood and 2x4s, carried it 10 yards from the cabin and threw it into a snowdrift. A useless, ugly piece of wood. A monument to his mistake. Lena closed her eyes. And that was when the new sound began. Not the wind, not the house. A deep, rhythmic, artificial thunder from the sky itself. A heavy, percussive beat that rattled the dishes in the kitchen cabinet. Thump, thump, thump. Caleb froze. Shovel in hand, his body shifted instantly into a defensive posture, weight on the balls of his feet, shoulders squared, eyes scanning the gray sky. Echo erupted beside him, not barking at the ground, barking at the sky, deep, challenging roars aimed straight up. A sleek black helicopter, a Bell 429, its lines sharp and predatory, broke through the low-hanging clouds. It circled the cabin, once its searchlight cutting a sterile white cone across the snow. Then with mechanical precision, it descended. The rotor wash blasted the snow into a blinding vortex. It settled onto the clearing, blades winding down. A side door slid open. Miguel Estrada, dark flight suit, mirrored aviator's military bearing, hopped out and stood at attention beside the machine. Then the passenger emerged. Dominic Varenas stepped onto the snow as if stepping from a limousine onto a red carpet. He was the perfect antithesis of everything this mountain stood for. Dark navy cashmere overcoat worth more than Caleb's truck. Black leather shoes, spotless, completely impractical. Dark hair perfectly coiffed, untouched by the rotor wind, as if even weather knew better than to inconvenience him. He radiated an aura of expensive, effortless control, the kind that comes not from competence but from never having been told no. He looked at the cabin, his upper lip curled a flicker of distaste. He looked at Caleb. His eyes slid over the flannel, the beard, the shovel, and dismissed all of it in a single glance. Then he saw Lena. She had stepped onto the porch, standing, her bare feet on the frozen wood. Well, Dominic said, his voice carrying easily in the cold, still air, smooth, cultured, dripping with condescension. The sleeping princess awakens. And look, a miracle, she stands. Dominic, Lena's voice was shaking. How did you find me? He gave a short, indulgent laugh. Lena, darling, please. Did you really think the satellite phone I gave you was just for emergencies? He tapped the side of his head. GPS chip. First thing my security team installed. I'm disappointed, really. I thought the game would last longer. He looked at Caleb now, scanned him boots to beard with the evaluating gaze of a man pricing livestock. And this is what the local color, the noble savage. I suppose I should thank him for keeping you warm. Caleb said nothing. His hand was tight on the shovel handle. The farce is over, Lena. Dominic's voice hardened. The playful mockery vanished. He was bored now. This was business. Miguel is warming the rotors. We have the Anderson Gala Friday night. You've embarrassed me enough. Get your things. He took a step toward the porch. His confidence was absolute, the walk of a man who had never encountered a locked door he couldn't buy the key to. He reached for Lena's arm. Now, Lena, enough. He never touched her. A low, guttural sound rumbled from the base of the porch steps. A sound so deep it seemed to vibrate in the frozen air. Itself felt more than heard, the way you feel thunder in your chest before you hear it in the sky. Echo had moved, without a command, without a signal from Caleb. The dog had positioned himself precisely, deliberately, with the trained instinct of a former military working dog, between Dominic Varennes and the porch steps. His ruff stood on end, doubling his apparent size. His lips curled back just slightly, just enough revealing the white flash of teeth that had been trained to do far more than warn. The growl that came from his chest was not confused, not questioning. It was deep, resonant, and utterly, absolutely serious. Dominic Varennes, the man who controlled boardrooms and moved billions with a phone call, flinched. He physically recoiled. One full step backward. His polished facade cracked, and underneath it was something small and pale and deeply ordinary. A coward in cashmere. Call off your animal, he snarled at Caleb. Caleb didn't move, didn't speak, just watched the shovel resting against his shoulder. Lena, I am not playing. Echo took one more step, and the growl became a sharp, hard snap of the air, his jaws closing on nothing, a warning shot that missed on purpose. And in that moment, something inside Lena shifted. She looked at Dominic, a man who tracked her like property, who had abandoned her in a freezing cabin because she was no longer useful, who had come not out of concern but out of schedule because the Anderson Gala needed a +1. She looked at Caleb, a man she had deeply betrayed, a man who was standing on his own porch, silent and steady, making no move to help her, but making no move to stop the dog either. And she looked at Echo, the dog who had seen through every layer of her deception, through the fake paralysis, through the designer coat, through the expensive perfume, and had found underneath it all the one thing that was real, her pain. And he had laid his head on it, and now he was standing between her and the man who had caused it. No, Lena said. Dominic stopped. What? She stood taller. Her bare feet ached on the frozen wood. Her voice, when it came, was clear and sharp and ringing in the cold mountain air. No, I'm not going. You can't be. I know exactly what I'm doing. I know you track me like an asset. I know you left me in a freezing cabin because you decided I was worthless. And I know you're not here because you were worried about me. You're here because the Anderson Gala needs a +1. Lena, get on the helicopter, Echo barked. One sound, short, sharp, final, period at the end of a sentence. Dominic looked at the dog, looked at the woman, looked at the silent man with the shovel. He turned, walked back to the helicopter. Before climbing in, he paused. You'll regret this. The helicopter lifted off. The sound of its rotors beat against the mountains, a foreign mechanical intrusion that grew fainter and fainter until it was finally swallowed by the vast, indifferent silence of Wyoming. The silence that rushed in was absolute. On the porch, no one moved. Then Caleb turned. He walked past Lena without looking at her, went inside. The door closed with a soft, final click. She followed eventually. Her feet were numb. Inside, Caleb was at the kitchen sink, scrubbing his hands with a ferocity that made the faucet handle rattle. Caleb, I am so sorry. He turned off the water, turned around slowly. His face was a mask. The warmth from the porch, the man who had spoken of Marin, who had smiled, was gone. Sorry for what? His voice was low, empty. For lying or for getting caught? It wasn't like that. I was trying to escape him. The money, the world I was trapped in. I don't care about your money. He said it so quietly it was more devastating than any shout. I don't care that you're rich. He walked past her, stood in the center of the room. His gaze fell on the empty space where the ramp had been. I care that you lied. He faced her. And what came next was not anger. It was worse than anger. It was a dissection. I let you into my home. This house, this is all I have left of her. This house was built on truth. It was the only place left where things were what they appeared to be. He held up his hands. The palms were scraped raw, the knuckles still red from bending metal. I built a ramp for you. My hands ached from the cold. I used lumber I can't afford to replace. Caleb, please. I talked to you. His voice cracked not with sadness, but with a sudden bright fury. On that porch, I said her name. I talked about Marin. He winced. I haven't said her name to another person since the funeral. Not in 4.5 years. Lena was crying, silent tears of shame. And what about him? Caleb pointed at Echo. The dog, sensing the tension, had risen to his feet. His ears were flat, his body low. He trusted you. The words came out jagged. He laid his head in your lap. He chose you. His trust is the only clean, honest thing I've had in my life since she died. He stepped closer. His eyes pinned her, and he barked when he saw you standing. He wagged his tail. He thought it was wonderful. You turned my dog's trust into a joke. This was the core of it, not the ramp, not the wood, not even Marin's name. It was the D. It was the corruption of the one pure thing he had left. I lost Marin. This place, this quiet, it was all I had to hold on to. And you turned it all into a game. He shook his head, a small, disgusted motion. We're trapped here. Roads are still blocked. Stay on your side of the room. He paused. And then the final blow delivered without heat, in a voice as flat and cold as the snow outside. And don't talk to the dog. He turned his back, picked up a book, sat on the cot. It was not forgiveness. It was not a reprieve. It was a sentence. Lena sank onto the couch. She was no longer a person in this room. She was a ghost. Echo caught between the two hostile forces, his simple heart unable to process why the air tasted like metal, and misery padded back to his rug. Lay down, placed his head on his paws. His eyes moved from Caleb to Lena, back and forth. The bridge was broken, and the dog didn't understand why. The night after Dominic's helicopter disappeared over the ridgeline was the longest night of Lena Ashford's life. The cabin was dark. The fire had been reduced to a low, sullen glow. Caleb had fed it only enough to keep the pipes from freezing, not enough for comfort. The message was clear. Warmth was no longer something he was offering. He was on his cot by the door, not sleeping. She could feel his wakefulness like a third presence in the room, heavy, sharp-edged. Echo lay on his rug by the hearth. The dog had not chosen a side, or rather, he had chosen both, and the impossibility of that choice had reduced him to a miserable, confused stillness. His ears were flat, his tail was tucked. Every few minutes, he would let out a soft, questioning whine, a sound so small and so lost that it cut through the silence like a blade through cloth. He would look at Caleb. His master's face was hidden behind a book he wasn't reading. He would look at Lena. She was curled on the couch, eyes open, staring at nothing. He would put his head back down and wait. Lena lay there and counted the cost. She had come to Wyoming to test Dominic, to see if his love survived the removal of her legs, her mobility, her usefulness as an ornament. She had designed the lie with the precision of a corporate restructuring, variable isolation, controlled environment, measurable outcome. It was, she now realized, the most grotesque thing she had ever done. Not because it was cruel to Dominic. Dominic had earned cruelty, but because she had treated a human emotion like a laboratory experiment. And the experiment had worked perfectly. Dominic had failed the test in under 4 hours. He had driven away and left her to freeze. What Lena hadn't accounted for was Caleb Mercer, a man who didn't know her name, her net worth, or her zip code. A man who had walked into a freezing cabin, seen a woman in a broken wheelchair, and carried her through a blizzard because that was what you did. Not for money, not for gratitude, not for anything. Because it was cold, and she was in it, and he could carry her out of it. That was the entire calculation. There was nothing else. She had brought her lie into the only place on earth where it did not belong. Dawn came the way it had every morning since the storm, not as light but as a slow reduction of darkness. Caleb rose. Boots, jacket, shovel. He did not look at her. He opened the door, stepped into the white world, and pulled it shut behind him. The crunch of his boots on packed snow grew fainter. The creak of the woodshed door, then the rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood, each blow carrying the controlled violence of a man who needed to hit something that wouldn't break. Lena waited until the sound was steady and far enough away. She sat up, swung her legs off the couch, her real legs, strong and functional, the legs of a woman who ran 3 miles every morning on a treadmill that cost more than Caleb's truck. She stood. The blood rushed to her feet, pins and needles. Echo raised his head. His ears perked. His tail gave a single tentative wag before his expression clouded with confusion. The last time she had stood up, the world had ended. "I know," Boylena whispered. "I know." She crossed to the kitchen, reached under the couch cushion, and pulled out the satellite phone, sleek black alien in this cabin of rough wood and honest stone. She powered it on. The screen glowed blue. She typed the message to James Whitfield, her head of security. Short, direct, James. Location GPS auto. Require immediate extraction. Private vehicle preferred. Absolute discretion. No involvement from Dominic Varenz. Confirm receipt. She pressed send. James would have a vehicle here within hours. He always did. The man had once extracted a diplomat from a compromised hotel in Beirut in under 90 minutes. A mountain road in Wyoming was routine. Then she did something she hadn't done since boarding school. She picked up a pen and wrote the truth. She found the paper on the kitchen table, the back of a scribbled shopping list in Caleb's handwriting. Flour, coffee, dog food, batteries. The handwriting was small, tight, efficient, like everything else about him. She found a pen. The ink was barely flowing. She did not write an apology. Caleb would not accept one. She did not write an explanation of her wealth. He would not care. Apologies were currency, and Caleb Mercer did not trade in currency. So she wrote facts. She wrote about the emptiness, the specific measurable emptiness of a life where every relationship had a dollar sign attached. She wrote about Dominic not as a villain, but as a symptom. A man who loved the way hedge fund managers loved, with stop losses and exit strategies. She wrote about the engagement party at the Pierre where 400 people had raised glasses to their future, and not a single one had known her middle name. She wrote about the lie, why she had designed it, what she had hoped to learn. How Dominic's departure had confirmed every suspicion about transactional love, and how the lie built to expose one man's emptiness had instead exposed her own. She wrote about finding Caleb, about the dislocating reality of his existence, the cabin that smelled like cedar and wood smoke instead of marble cleaner and new leather, the way he moved without flourish or performance, just action following need, the way he checked windows and fed fires and shoveled snow with the same quiet intensity as if the world's problems could be solved one task at a time. She wrote about the porch, the way his face changed when he said Marin's name, the hard lines softening, the smile that appeared and vanished like sunlight through storm clouds, the courage it must have taken. 4.5 years of silence, and he had broken it for her, for a liar wearing his dead wife's clothes. And then she wrote about Echo. This was where her handwriting changed. The letters grew uneven, the ink smeared. Your dog taught me what trust looks like, not the word. The thing itself. He didn't see my chair. He didn't see my clothes. He didn't see my name or my account balance. He smelled my pain. That's all. Just the pain. And he decided it was real. And he laid his head on it. I don't know what that cost a dog. I don't know how Echo measures trust, but I know what it cost you to watch him do it. I saw your face in the dark when you thought I couldn't see you. You were holding onto the side of your cot like a man holding onto a cliff edge. He taught me what I've been looking for. Not love. I don't think I know what that word means anymore. Trust. Simple, stupid, reckless trust. The kind that doesn't ask for a resume first. And I betrayed it. I betrayed him. And by betraying him, I betrayed you. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm leaving. Not because you told me to, because this cabin deserves better than what I brought into it. She put down the pen, read the letter once. Decided against editing it. The mess was the point. She folded it carefully and placed it on the kitchen table, weighted down by a smooth river stone from the windowsill. Then she remembered something. During the long hours on the couch, she had been leafing through a mud-splattered outdoor supply catalog on the coffee table, killing time her mind elsewhere. But Echo had been watching. The dog had been lying on his rug, and when she turned to a specific page, a spread of dog toys, bright-colored rubber things designed for large, powerful chewers, his head had lifted. His ears had rotated forward, and his eyes had fixed on one item, a ball, bright red, large, almost indestructible. Echo had stared at it with a look Lena had never seen on his face before. Not suspicion, not assessment, longing, simple, uncomplicated, childlike longing. The look of a creature who had forgotten how to want things and was remembering just for a moment that wanting was allowed. She had noticed, filed it away. Now it was a mission. She picked up the satellite phone, typed a second message to James. Additional request. Purchase one large, indestructible red rubber ball, best available quality, designed for German Shepherd or similar large breed. Deliver with vehicle. She stared at the words. A billionaire standing barefoot in a stranger's kitchen, asking her security chief to source a dog toy. But it wasn't absurd. It was the only honest thing she could give. Not to Caleb. Caleb wouldn't accept gifts. To Echo. The dog who had crossed a room in the middle of the night, ignored 4 years of grief, and laid his head on a liar's lap because he smelled something underneath the lie that was real. The ball wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't undo the ramp. It wouldn't unsay Marin's name. But it was a tangible piece of her remorse. A small, red, ridiculous apology to the only creature in this cabin who had offered her something without conditions. She pressed send. I'm sorry, boy, she whispered. He whined, a low, gentle sound, as if he understood not the words but the weight behind them. James arrived 4 hours later, not by helicopter, a black SUV, unmarked chains on the tires. James Whitfield behind the wheel. Silver-haired, built like a retired middleweight who still hit the heavy bag 3 times a week. He wore a dark wool coat and an expression of absolute professional neutrality. He did not ask questions. He never did. He handed her a bag, clean clothes, a heavy coat, boots, and at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, a bright red rubber ball. Large, solid, the kind of thing designed to survive being chewed by an animal with a bite force that could crack a baseball bat. Lena held the ball. It was heavier than she expected. She walked back inside. Caleb was still in the woods. She placed the ball on Echo's rug beside the hearth. The bright synthetic red was garish against the old wood and worn fabric. An alien object in a world of natural things. Echo patted over, sniffed it, nudged it with his nose. It rolled an inch. His ears, which had been drooping, perked. She knelt, put her hand on his head one last time. He leaned into it. "Take care of him," she said. She stood, put on her coat, put on her boots, walked to the door. She did not look back. The SUV pulled away down the logging road, chains crunching through ice and mud. The sound grew distant, then nothing. The cabin was empty again. When Caleb returned from the woods an hour later, his arms full of split logs, the first thing he noticed was the temperature. The fire had been maintained. She must have added a log before she left. The second thing he noticed was the silence. Not the heavy, hostile silence of the past 12 hours. A different silence. The specific, unmistakable quiet of absence. He set the wood down, looked at the couch. Blankets folded, pillows stacked. She was gone. He walked to the kitchen table and found the letter. He recognized the paper his own shopping list flipped over. He picked it up, read it slowly the way you read a document that might contain something explosive. When he finished, he folded it. Opened the small metal box on the shelf above the desk, the box where he kept Marin's letters, the ones she had written to him during his deployments. Letters with sand still in the creases, letters that smelled like her hand lotion and the mint gum she always chewed. He placed Lena's letter inside, closed the box, locked it. He did not read it again. Then he saw the ball. It sat on Echo's rug like a drop of blood on snow, vivid, impossible to ignore, bright, obnoxious, synthetic red. He stared at it, a toy, a token, a parting gift from a woman who could buy everything and understand nothing. Echo had already found it. The dog was lying beside it, his nose touching the rubber surface. And as Caleb watched, something shifted in Echo's face. His ears slowly lifted. He nudged the ball. It rolled. He tracked it with his eyes, and something ancient and simple sparked behind them. He pounced. The ball bounced once on the wooden floor with a solid, satisfying thump. Echo caught it, tossed it, caught it again. His tail tucked and still for days began to wag. Caleb turned away. 3 weeks passed. The roads were plowed. The sky turned a high, brilliant blue. The snow settled into a deep, glittering crust that blinded you if you looked at it without squinting. Caleb and Echo were alone again, the way it was supposed to be, except nothing was the same. The red ball had become the third presence in the cabin. It was the first thing Echo looked for in the morning, batting it out from under the couch, with his paw carrying it to wherever Caleb was dropping it at his feet. It was the last thing the dog nudged into Caleb's hand at night, slick with saliva, warm from being held in his mouth like a treasure. The sound of it, a heavy thump on the wooden floor, a hollow whoomp as the dog caught it midair, had become the new heartbeat of the cabin. Caleb resented it. He resented it because it was a reminder. Every time he saw that red sphere, he saw her standing in his kitchen, caught in the flashlight beam. He resented it because it felt like a bribe, a rich woman's parting gift, designed to purchase forgiveness through the back door of his dog's simple heart. And in his most honest moments, the moments that came at 3 a.m. when the fire was low, he resented it because it had worked. Echo was different. The stoic grieving shadow who had been Caleb's mirror for 3 years, reflecting his silence, matching his withdrawal step for step, was gone. In his place was something Caleb hadn't seen in years. A dog. Just a dog. Finding simple, stupid, uncomplicated joy in a rubber ball. Echo played. He tossed the ball and caught it. He pushed it under the couch and scrambled to retrieve it, his tail wagging so hard his entire back end swayed. He carried it outside and dropped it in the snow and dug it out and carried it back, proud and panting. Every time Echo dropped the ball at Caleb's feet, tail wagging, eyes bright with the universal canine question, Caleb felt something shift inside his chest. Not a softening, something more complicated, something he didn't have a name for. He would ignore the offering, turn his back, wait for the dog to give up. But Echo never gave up. He just waited, tail slowing, then nudge. The ball pressed gently against Caleb's boot. 3 weeks and 2 days after Lena left, Caleb drove to Pinedale for supplies. Echo was in the back seat, which was unusual. He normally rode shotgun. Today the dog was curled up on the bench seat, the red ball tucked between his front paws, not watching the road, guarding the ball. Pinedale was a small town the way a campfire is a small fire. Post office, general store, diner, gas station, church. Population maybe 300 depending on the season. Caleb parked, went to the post office, unlocked his P.O. box. Inside junk mail, a supply catalog in one thick formal envelope. Wyoming Regional Bank. The paper was heavy, cream-colored, the kind of envelope that announces itself as important before you open it. A cold dread settled in his stomach. He knew what this was. The foreclosure notice. The final act. Marin's medical bills had hollowed them out. Pancreatic cancer doesn't respect budgets. The diagnosis in November 2020. The treatment, chemotherapy, radiation, experimental therapies, palliative care. The hospital in Riverton. The specialists in Denver. Insurance covered some of it. The rest came out of their savings, their retirement, their future. And when the savings were gone, it came out of the house. He had been making interest-only payments for 2 years, stretching every dollar from odd jobs and firewood sales. But the balloon payment was coming. A number so large it made his vision blur. The kind of number that when you're a man living alone on a mountain with a dong and a dead wife's photograph, might as well be infinity. He shoved the envelope into his jacket pocket, bought his supplies, drove home. At the kitchen table, he stared at the envelope. Echo was on his rug, the ball between his paws, watching with the patient gaze of a boy who knew his master was hurting, but couldn't identify the wound. Caleb opened the letter. It wasn't a foreclosure notice. It was a single sheet of thick paper, densely printed with legal language that required each sentence to be read 3 times before the meaning came through. But certain phrases jumped out like signal flares. Pleased to inform you. Outstanding mortgage on property 14 Delta Sierra has been satisfied in full. Zero balance statement is attached for your records. He read it again, and a third time. His hands were trembling. He scanned the document for a name, a reason, a mistake. He found it at the bottom, just above the crisp digital signature of Karen Driscoll, Vice President of Loan Servicing in the Payment Details section, payer of record Ashford Holdings Group. The room went very, very quiet. The blood drained from Caleb's face, then rushed back in a hot, prickling tide of something he hadn't felt this intensely since the day he'd learned Marin's cancer had metastasized. He shot to his feet. The chair scraped back with a sound that made Echo flinch and drop the ball. No, she had paid him. She had taken his silence, his pain, his pride, the pride of a man who had served 12 years in the Marine Corps, who had earned every callus on his hands, who had never accepted a thing he hadn't worked for, and she had put a price tag on it. She had reduced him to a charity case, a project, a stray she could feel good about rescuing with her checkbook. He slammed his fist on the table. The coffee mug jumped. Echo scrambled to his feet, ears flat. Caleb was pacing, hands clenched. He wanted to burn the letter. He stopped in front of the fireplace, looked at the photograph. Marin's bright eyes, her practical smile. I'm losing your home. The thought stopped him cold, because he was. It wasn't an abstract fear. It was a mathematical certainty. The balloon payment was due in 11 weeks. He had $3,400 in his checking account and a stack of red-stamped envelopes in a drawer he hadn't opened in months. Slowly, he walked to the old filing cabinet. Bottom drawer, the thick folder marked home. He dumped the contents on the table. It was an avalanche of failure. Past due notices, interest statements, a letter from an attorney he couldn't afford informing him that the bank had initiated pre-foreclosure proceedings. Complex amortization schedules covered in his own desperate handwriting, calculations done at 3 in the morning, trying to make numbers add up to something other than zero. He found the original loan document from 2019, the principal, the number he had been carrying for 6 years like a rucksack full of stones. He found the letters from the bank, the ones he had ignored, the ones where Karen Driscoll's name was printed above language describing remedies available to the lender and auction of the secured property. He was not losing this place. He had already lost it. He was just too proud to admit it. Caleb sank into the chair. He picked up the letter again, paid in full, and then he thought about her letter, the one in the metal box. He taught me what real trust looks like. I betrayed him. James Whitfield. Lena's head of security was a man who followed protocols. When his employer asked to be extracted from a property in rural Wyoming, Whitfield did what any competent security professional would do. He ran a background check on the property and its owner. Standard operating procedure, liability assessment. And when you run a background check on a piece of rural real estate, you find liens, encumbrances, tax records, and pending foreclosure actions. Whitfield would have reported this to Lena. He wouldn't have editorialized. He would have simply included it in his situational summary the way he included weather reports and road conditions, a fact among facts. And Lena would have seen it, the chain around Caleb's neck, the debt that was strangling him, the balloon payment that was going to rip this cabin off its foundation and sell it to the highest bidder. She hadn't paid him. She hadn't bought him off. She hadn't written a check to salve her guilt. She had seen the chain, and she had cut it. Not for him, for the cabin, for the mountain. For the porch where Marin had stood and pointed at the rock formations and said, "This stone has been here for 2.7 billion years, Caleb. If we build on this, we're building on something that's already proven it can last." Lena Ashford, a woman drowning in money and starving for everything else, had looked at his cage and recognized it, because she lived in one too. Hers was made of gold. His was made of debt. But a cage is a cage, and she had the key to his even if she couldn't find the key to her own. This wasn't a transaction. It wasn't charity. It was one prisoner setting another one free. The understanding settled over him, heavy, complicated, entirely without the clean simplicity he craved. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't gratitude. It was just a fact, as solid and as real as the ramp he had built, and just as practical. A soft, wet thump interrupted his thoughts. He looked down. Echo was at his feet. The dog had crept back head low, moving with the careful diplomacy of an animal navigating emotional terrain above his pay grade. He had picked up the red ball and with gentle precision placed it directly on top of Caleb's boot. Then he sat back, looked up. His tail gave a single slow wag. "Please." Caleb stared at the ball, the garish, ugly, indestructible symbol of everything he was trying not to feel. He reached down. His hand was trembling slightly. He picked it up. It was heavy, solid, warm from the dog's mouth. He looked at Echo. He looked at the bank letter. He looked at the photograph of Marin, who would have understood all of this immediately and would have told him he was being a stubborn fool about 3 weeks ago. For the first time since the night the flashlight found Lena standing in his kitchen, Caleb looked at the red ball and did not feel anger. He felt the weight of it. That was all. Just the weight. Spring came to the high plains of Wyoming the way it always does, not gently but violently, as a messy, loud, undignified thaw. The world that had been locked in white silence for months was now weeping. Water dripped from everything, the eaves of the cabin, the branches of the pines, the sharp edges of granite boulders. The snow pulled back like a dirty bandage, revealing earth that was brown and scarred and muddy, but alive. You could smell it, the raw, wet, organic scent of soil waking up after a long sleep. April 2026, 6 months since the storm. Caleb was outside repairing a section of fence that had buckled under the snow. The physical labor was a balm. Each swing of the post driver, each thud of wood sinking into softened earth was a small act of restoration. Fixing what was broken, making things hold. Echo was nearby, not the stoic gray sentinel of 6 months ago, not the grief-stricken shell of a dog going through the motions of existence. Echo was lying in a patch of muddy, sun-warmed grass, his belly exposed, his legs in the air, the red ball tucked between his front paws. He would bat it lazily, catch it, mouth it, then let out a long, contented sigh. Every few minutes he would trot over to Caleb, ball in mouth, and nudge it against his leg. Caleb had started throwing it. Not at first. For weeks he had ignored it. Then one morning he couldn't remember which he had been standing on the porch with his coffee, and Echo had dropped the ball at his feet, and something in Caleb's arm had moved before his brain gave permission. He threw. The ball arced through the cold air. Echo exploded after it, a gray streak against white, and caught it on the first bounce. The dog had looked back at him with an expression of such pure, uncomplicated triumph that something cracked in Caleb's chest. Not break. Crack. The way ice cracks in spring. Not shattering but yielding, making space for what's underneath. He threw it again, and each time the crack widened. Now in April, throwing the ball was part of the routine. Coffee, fire, ball, fence, ball, dinner. Ball, it wasn't joy. Caleb wasn't ready for that word yet, but it was something adjacent to it, something in the same neighborhood. He was driving a fence post into the soft earth when Echo's head snapped up. The transformation was instant. The lazy, belly-up dog vanished. In its place was the military animal. Rigid, alert, every muscle engaged. His ears rotated forward, locked onto the main road a mile distant through the trees. The red ball dropped from his mouth. Forgotten. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Caleb grabbed his hammer. "What is it, boy?" Then he heard it. An engine, not his truck, not a helicopter. An older engine, struggling gears grinding as it climbed the steep, poorly maintained access road. A full minute passed. Caleb and Echo stood their ground. Then the vehicle emerged from the pines. An old blue Ford pickup. Rust pocked along the wheel wells. Muffler complaining. The kind of truck you bought for $3,000 cash from a lot outside Riverton where nobody asked for ID. It was not a vehicle of wealth. It was not a vehicle of power. It was a vehicle that was trying very hard to belong. The truck pulled to a stop 20 yards from the cabin. The engine idled rough and unsteady, then died with a sputtering cough that sounded almost embarrassed. The driver's door opened. A heavy work boot caked in mud planted itself on the gravel. She stepped out. It was Lena. But it wasn't. This was not the pale, shivering woman from the Aspen cabin, not the designer coat and the matted hair and the broken wheelchair, not the sharp, defiant figure who had stood barefoot on the porch and told Dominic Varenz to get on his helicopter. This woman wore faded denim jeans. Real faded, not the $400 kind that come pre-distressed. A simple wool sweater the color of oatmeal. Sturdy boots with actual mud on them. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical, messy ponytail. Her face was clean. No makeup, no artifice, no shield. Her cheeks were red from the spring wind. She looked tired. She looked nervous. And she looked utterly, completely, terrifyingly real. She closed the truck door with a soft metallic click. She did not walk toward the cabin. She just stood there by the truck, her hands shoved deep in her pockets. The gesture was deliberate. Look, nothing, no gifts, no checks, no lease, just me. Caleb walked toward her, slowly, the hammer still in his hand, Echo at his heel. He stopped 10 feet away. What are you doing here? His voice was rough, like gravel. I can't take the money back, he said before she could answer. The words came out sharp. I won't. I'm a Marine. We don't take handouts. His pride, the last stubborn, immovable thing he owned. Lena nodded as if she had expected exactly this. I know, she said. Her voice was quiet. Steady. It's not for you. Caleb's brow furrowed. The money wasn't for you, Caleb. She took one small, careful step closer. It was for the bank. I didn't give you anything. I took something away from them. She paused, let the words land. They were going to take this land. They were going to take Marin's legacy, her mountain, the porch she built, the foundation she chose because the rock underneath it was 2.7 billion years old. Her eyes moved past him to the cabin, to the mountains, to the enormous ancient landscape that didn't care about mortgages or lies or broken trust. I come from a world that eats places like this, that paves over quiet and calls it progress. I couldn't let them do that. She looked back at him. Her gaze was clear and unflinching. You don't owe me anything. You never did. The debt is gone. It's done. Caleb stood very still. The hammer hung at his side. Then why did you come back? Lena's composure cracked, just for a second, a hairline fracture in the careful calm she had built for this moment. Her eyes glistened. I came back, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, to see Echo. The name hung in the spring air like a bell tone. Echo heard it. The gray dog standing rigid at Caleb's side heard his name from her voice, from the voice of the woman whose lap had been warm, whose tears had tasted like salt, whose hand had found the exact right spot behind his left ear. He let out a sound, not a bark, not a growl, a high, strangled, agonized keen of recognition, the sound of an animal whose heart had just been ambushed by something it thought was lost. Echo, Lena said again, and her voice broke on the second syllable. It was too much. 6 months of absence, the ghost of her scent fading from the blankets. The red ball, her gift that he had carried and chewed and slept with and dropped at Caleb's feet 1,000 times, as if somehow if he just kept offering it, she would materialize at the other end of the throw. And now she was here. Echo broke from Caleb's side like a gray bolt of lightning. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He ran. A flat-out ears-back mud-spraying sprint across the 20 yards between them. His paws slipped in the mud. He didn't care. His eyes were fixed on her. Lena dropped to her knees, her arms open. He hit her like a wave. Not hard because at the last second some ancient instinct remembered gentleness, but with a desperate full-body collision of fur and warmth and longing. His front paws landed on her shoulders. His face buried itself in her neck. And the sound that came from him, that high, continuous, aching whine, was the sound of a heart that had been holding its breath for 6 months and had finally been allowed to exhale. He licked her tears. She was crying. Not quietly, not politely. Full, open, graceless sobs that shook her entire body as she wrapped her arms around his thick gray neck. Hey, boy. Hey, I'm here. Echo pulled back, looked at her face, licked it again, then spun in a tight, joyful circle, paws sliding in the mud tail, a frantic blur, and seemed to remember something urgent. He ran, back across the yard, back to the patch of grass where he had been lying. He snatched up the red ball, her ball, the ball he had guarded for 6 months like a sacred relic, and sprinted back. Muddy, wild-eyed, he skidded to a stop in front of her and dropped the ball, wet, filthy, covered in 6 months of teeth marks, directly into her lap. Then he pushed it with his nose, looked up at her, tail going like a metronome set to allegro. "You're back. You're back. Throw it." Lena left. A wet, broken, beautiful sound. Caleb stood where he was. The hammer hung loose at his side. He watched his dog, his partner, his shadow, the last living thread connecting him to the woman in the photograph, wagging his tail with an abandon that bordered on delirium, pressing his head into a stranger's chest, offering her the red ball like it was the most precious thing in the world. Because to Echo it was. And Caleb saw what Echo had seen all along. Not the lie, not the money, not the broken wheelchair or the designer coat or the performance of helplessness. Echo had never cared about any of that. From the very first night, from the moment he had crossed the dark room and laid his head on her lap, Echo had seen one thing: pain. Real, honest, unfakeable pain. The kind that lives in the body's chemistry and the cortisol and the adrenaline and the salt of genuine tears. The kind that no amount of money can cure and no amount of performance can create. Echo had smelled it through every layer of her deception, the way you smell smoke through a closed door. And he had decided it was real, and he had offered comfort. And when that comfort had been betrayed, when the flashlight had found her, standing when Caleb had thrown the ramp into the snow, when the cabin had gone cold and silent, Echo had not withdrawn his verdict. He had simply waited, patient, certain, carrying the red ball like a promise. The dog was right. The dog had always been right. Caleb looked at Lena kneeling in the mud, holding a slobber-covered rubber ball, her face streaked with tears and her arms full of dog. He looked at Echo, whose body was vibrating with a joy so intense it seemed to generate its own gravity. And something released in Caleb's chest. It was not sudden, not dramatic, not a Hollywood moment. It was slow, quiet, the way ice releases a river in spring. Not all at once, but molecule by molecule, until one day you realize the water is moving and the ice is gone, and you can't remember exactly when it happened. A long breath left his body, the longest he had taken in 4.5 years. It carried something heavy, something he had been holding so tightly for so long, he had forgotten it was there. Not grief. Grief was permanent. Grief was the foundation, now the ancient rock on which everything else was built. What left him was the resistance, the clenched, white-knuckled refusal to let anything new in. The fortress, the wall, the decision made in a hospital parking lot in Riverton, listening to his wife die through a phone speaker, that he would never again allow himself to be in a position where the world could take something from him. The hammer slipped from his fingers. It landed in the soft earth with a muffled thud. Lena looked up, mud on her knees, tears on her face, dog in her arms, ball in her lap, waiting. Caleb looked at the woman and at the tea and at the ridiculous red ball. He nodded. One sharp movement, a military gesture. The kind that meant move out, and I've got your 6, and we're going to be okay all at the same time. Get inside, he said. His voice was rough, raw, but not hard. Not anymore. You're getting cold. He turned and walked toward the porch. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. He heard her footsteps in the mud behind him. Uneven, stumbling, the footsteps of a woman trying to stand while being enthusiastically tackled by a 65-pound German shepherd who had no intention of letting her out of his sight ever again. And between them, clicking happily on the wooden porch steps, the red ball clenched triumphantly in his jaws, was Echo, the dog who had seen through every lie, the dog who had forgiven before he was asked, the dog who had carried a rubber ball across 6 months of silence because he believed with the unshakable certainty of an animal who has never been taught to doubt that the people he loved would find their way back to each other. Inside, Caleb built the fire. 3 logs, positioned with the precision of a man who knows exactly how long each will burn. Lena sat on the couch, her feet on the floor, no pretense. Echo lay between them, the red ball under one paw, his head resting on the other. His eyes moved from Caleb to Lena, content. On the mantelpiece in a frame of rough-hewn pine, Marin smiled her practical, knowing smile. Caleb made coffee. 2 mugs. He brought one to Lena. Their fingers brushed on the handle. Neither pulled away. Outside, the last snow was melting. Water ran in thin streams down the mountainside, joining the creeks, joining the rivers flowing out of the high country and into the world below. The loud, complicated, imperfect world that Caleb had spent 4.5 years trying to forget existed. The water didn't ask permission. It just moved, slow and steady and certain, the way things move when the ice is finally gone. The most honest conversations are the ones that never use words. They happen in the weight of a hammer dropped in soft earth, in the sound of a coffee mug being filled for 2 instead of 1, in the nudge of a cold nose against a trembling hand, in the heavy, patient thump of a red ball dropped at the feet of someone who isn't ready to throw it yet, but will be, eventually, when the ice breaks. Loyalty isn't about finding perfection in the people you love. It's about seeing the real aching heart underneath the armor and the lies and deciding with every stubborn fiber of your being that the heart is worth more than the armor. Echo never saw a liar. He never saw a billionaire. He never saw a broken wheelchair or an empty promise or a performance of helplessness. He saw pain, real pain, and he laid his head on it. And in doing so, he taught 2 broken people something that neither of them could have learned alone, that the purest form of trust doesn't come with conditions. It doesn't require a resume. It doesn't need an explanation or an apology or a bank statement. It comes on 4 paws. It smells like wet fur and muddy rubber. And it asks only one thing. Throw the ball. I'll bring it back. I'll always bring it back. It's a powerful reminder that the most honest conversations are often held without words. This story teaches us that true loyalty is not about finding perfection in others, but about seeing the real aching heart beneath the armor and the lies. Echo didn't just see a flaw, he saw the pain, and he proved that the purest forgiveness often comes on 4 paws. If this story of truth healing and the unbreakable bond between a veteran and his dog resonated with you, please consider sharing it with someone who understands that kind of loyalty. We read every single comment and would truly love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been forgiven by an animal before a human was ready to forgive you? Tell us your story in the comments below. And if you or someone you love is a veteran, we see you. We honor your service, and we hope you found your quiet place. God bless you, and thank you for listening. Our newest story is ready and waiting for you. Just click the video that has appeared on your screen.